upstairs.
And
Well, Dad, you were talking about it.
Yeah, yeah.
and you
And
said it didn't have indoor plumbing at
The
first.
upstairs comes in the second phase of my notes.
Okay, well, start with the beginning.
You and Red Talbot.
Okay.
Okay, in the beginning there was the house.
That's fine.
That's good.
Are you ready?
I'm recording.
Oh, you
Okay.
are?
I've been recording.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Okay, start then.
So the house was basically, we remembered that Grandpa and our dad built the house, and the material was ordered from Sears Roebuck for the total amount the house was to be, and when they finished the construction of it, there was one plank left over. Now that is my recollection of the story. Mary Catherine said that she heard Grandpa said that our dad planned it, the house, and they ordered it, he built it, but the credit went to our dad for sizing up the amount of material. That's my version. I don't know what yours is on that.
No, I don't recall very much about the building of the house. But Dad,
You were born in that house, and that's
I was born in the house. But Dad was a good carpenter, and I think that he planned well. And I remember too that when the strike occurred on the railroad, that he then moved to or worked in Eagle Lake building houses. So that was his second occupation.
Huh.
And then when the strike, he refused to be scabbed. Let's see, a scab? Is that what they call
Right,
it?
right.
So then when the strike was over, he returned to the railroad in Glidden, which ended up in his death,
Yeah.
which was very...
Well, I've got to tell the favorite story of mine is that he was a switchman in the railroad yard, and he always put his shoes out on the back porch to air after he worked. And we came back from town one day, and the shoes were gone. So he goes in the house and gets his pistol and goes over to the railroad yard. And goes the hobos at that time, during the Depression, came in from San Antonio and Houston, and when the changes were made on the train, they hoboed around town looking for a meal or for work to have a meal. So he knew as soon as those shoes were gone what happened to them. He takes his pistol and leaves, and about, I don't know how long later, I remember he came back with his shoes. So he found whoever and took care of that. I don't believe he used the pistol.
It wasn't smoking.
It was not smoking.
Do you remember him, Uncle John, very well?
My memory of him most vividly was, I don't know how I came by the cigar. He died when I was 7, and I had this cigar, and so he came in of an evening when he was on the evening shift and had 30 minutes for supper. In the dining room, he put me in the corner. You smoke that cigar. I guess I lit it, and I remember I was squatting down. I didn't sit, I was squatting down, I was puffing on that cigar, and he was eating and looking at me.
Was that your punishment?
Yep, I kept puffing away, and finally he kept looking at his watch, and I knew, all of a sudden, he said, well, I've got to go. So I smoked it right through that period, and he kept waiting me to get sick, of course, and I kept puffing away, and I don't recall whatever happened when he left, but that is a vivid recollection that I had.
I had one too about smoking. He caught me smoking a cigarette in the garden. We had some tall bushes growing there, and as a result of it, he put me in the smokehouse and locked me in and kept me in there for a number of hours as punishment. And although he smoked, but he was darn sure that I did not smoke. And that just about cured me of smoking for a long time.
Yeah.
Did most people smoke? Did most adults
Yeah.
smoke?
And they
Smoke.
rolled their own.
They roll their own.
Prince Albert or
Yeah.
Durham, little bag of Durham
Uh-huh.
tobacco.
Uh-huh.
And,
Did women smoke?
no,
I don't think they're-
not that I know of. Also, I recall that each morning, after he got up, he would go out on the swing in the front porch, and there he would have one drink of whiskey. He bought this regular home brew, or let's see, there was a name for it, but anyway, about one jigger of whiskey. That's all he would drink at any time or any time of the day, just one drink.
And it was in the morning.
In the
And it was
morning?
in the
Well,
morning.
I remember that as a hot toddy. That's
It was a hot time.
a hot toddy. You use the hot water and the lemon and that's what he had for his
Get going?
yeah.
To get himself going.
Yeah.
Most time he was working 4 o'clock shift,
That's
4
right. That
to
is right.
midnight.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
Now he had 5 brothers and a sister, and to our knowledge, most of his brothers had an alcoholic problem. He was the only one in the family that did not drink, and it was
except for his hot toddy.
except for that toddy deal, and I could. But growing up, that was the experiences we kept hearing about him within the family.
Did you see his family much after he died?
Mainly in LaGrange. Most of them lived in LaGrange at the time. And therein lies my favorite story with my brother when he was a teenager. And he drove us to LaGrange on a Saturday afternoon, and there was a feast, a church feast. And at all those feasts, they have all this barbecue and things to eat, plus a lot of homebrew, assorted beer. And I think my brother's cousins took over with he, and they seemed to have had a lot of fun. It came time for us to go home, and Highway 71 had just been rebuilt, but had not been topped. And there was one rut in the road. And Mama was sitting right next to him, and I was in the back seat, and he could not stay in that rut. I kept remembering that she was giving him the pinch job. But he had trouble, and I think he consumed a number of those beers that created a little problem with his driving, but that was my recollection.
Do you remember that, Uncle Lee?
Yes.
And what happened?
Well, I got home all right. Mother would just constantly pinch me and, on my leg, and we just kept on going, and finally did get home. But it was quite an occasion. This whole brew, was fairly strong, and didn't take too much to get advantage of you, but that's what happened.
My other story there with he in this house was that his good buddy was Red Talbot from Columbus, whose daddy had a Chevrolet dealership. And Red had a racer. And he'd come in and pick Bud up, and of course I wanted to go with him, and they'd never let me go, laugh, and they'd take off. And they came back one day and dashed into the house and went up, the upstairs had a door there to the back porch. And they went in that door and locked the door and went upstairs, laughing all the way up. So I found something that I could really retaliate. I took the garden hose and slung it up on the porch roof of the back porch, turned the water on, and I climbed up on the roof and squirted water right into the upstairs window. And
In the bedroom?
oh yeah, right. There I can so vividly remember getting on that porch and squirting that water. I'm going to get back at those guys.
And you did.
shock. She never got over the death. The way I mean, it was a very long time in recovering from it.
Yeah.
Long time. But at the time was 14, and I was 7, and then when he went off to college at 17, you know, she still was working pretty hard at it. So I didn't recall the activities, but she did well, and she took a lot of activities to be perfectly normal.
Uh-huh.
And even at that time, he was a big ball player in Glidden with the Railroaders, and was very active in traveling around the towns playing ball.
Who Uncle Lee was?
Oh yeah, he was a catcher. And my favorite recollection there, when we were in Allerton, 3 miles east of Columbus, out in a pasture, of course, and had a good infield laid out, but around the infield was a bunch of mesquite thorn trees. And somebody hit a foul ball all the way out, and he took off after that ball and ran right through that thorn bush. And I think we picked thorns out of him most of the night. I can remember yet how he tore into that bush to come out of there and just throw the thorn.
So did Nana go to the games?
No,
Not to that.
no, she didn't go.
No.
Another time we played baseball in Rosenberg, or Sugarland rather, and this town lot baseball, and we were supposed to get a certain percentage of the gate receipts. And after the game, we went to this fellow that had the money, and we couldn't find him. And somebody told us that he was in the sugar mill. We went all through the sugar mill looking for him, and never did find him. And we never got a penny out of the game.
So were you in high school then? Was that, or is that?
Yeah.
Yes, I was in high school.
High
yes.
school. And you went to school in Columbus?
Yes,
And
I
how-
finished up in Columbus.
You started in Glidden. Did they have a school in Glidden?
We had a school
Oh, yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And how'd you get into Columbus then for school?
In the car, I drove a car, and
You had a car? You took our car?
you took your car.
I didn't know you had. I had a horse.
And I would pick up Waldine Oppenheim
Uh-huh.
most
Pretty cute.
every
I
morning,
remember
and
pretty cute
she would
now.
ride with me to school. So, also I remember one time the car got extremely hot, and I opened it up, got the radiator, and opened the cap, and the steam came out, and
Oh, I remember that.
took all the skin off of my
Oh,
wrist.
Ooh.
It's blue.
And it
Oh.
was blue, and they finally put some medicine on it and wrapped it up. And even before it healed, I played basketball there at the Opera House in Columbus.
Quite the job.
Yeah.
So I went through seventh grade or 8th grade in Glidden, and the first year going to Columbus, Uncle Willie let me use one of his horses when I had an old roan. It's beautiful old nag, and I'd get a slow lope going, and I'd just tie the reins around the saddle horn and get out my Spanish vocabulary.
And you studied on
So
horseback?
on horseback, and Grandma Strous's house was just a block away from the high school. So I'd leave the horse there during the day and go to school and go to football practice with it, and then head home. And the recollection I always had coming back into Glidden was a curve. And when I headed through that curve, I could see our house. And Mama was sitting on the porch.
Uh-huh.
And every time I can recall, I recall that she'd get out of her swing on the porch and go in the house, and what she was doing was putting cornbread in the oven.
Oh,
By
wow.
the time I'd get home and get unsaddled, but the cornbread was ready, and that was the meal. But
Wow.
I could see that every time.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, Uncle Lee, did you play football too?
Played football in Columbus, and this one game, I think the standout and one that I clearly remember was that I was a halfback, and the play call was a pass. And I ran down straight down as fast as I could and looked back over my shoulder and here was the ball. And all I did was throw up my hands like this and caught the ball and went for a touchdown. That evening or that night and the next day I'll be strutting around Columbus and everybody congratulated me.
Now, that wasn't the year that Eagle Lake beat Columbus, was it 96-0?
Yeah. They had this fellow Wallace.
Bill Wallace,
that,
an All-American.
That later played at Rice. And one time he had the ball and he was coming right at me. I went down to tackle him and he ball it went right on over me. And, I never did even touch him. And he went on for a touchdown.
I can remember that very well.
Well, Dad, you were quite the football player too, weren't you?
Oh, of course. I followed the footsteps of my brother. We had the junior year in school, we had a pretty good team, but the principal was our coach. And before each game, he would say, "Now, fellas, let's go out there and hold the score down." We didn't come close to winning. We hold the score down.
Are you talking about coffee?
Now that was Otis Coffee was at Eagle Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, that beat Columbus. Yeah, I remember that. But then our senior year in school, we did quite well. We were undefeated our senior year.
And you were captain or
I was
you were quarterback?
of course I was. The whole ball of wax.
Always running the show.
What about dating? Did you date in high school?
Oh, he had a beautiful gal that he dated right through school.
Who was that, Uncle Lee?
Madeline Wallace.
No. Elvira Linedecker was yours.
That was later.
Out of high school? Was that out of high school?
That was later after I went to Columbus.
Oh, yeah, okay.
School.
Okay.
And,
But earlier it was who?
Madeline Wallace, she and I were always in the Mayday play,
Oh.
and I thought she was real great. Then when I went on to Columbus, I dated somebody else, and then ended up dating Winona Swiggle.
Yep.
But leaving Columbus and going to A&M was Elvira.
Yeah. I got to tell the
Elvira
story
who?
on going to,
Linedecker.
Oh, okay.
when we going to A&M, Mr. Schiller, Robert Schiller was married to Ruby, you know, and they were quite a couple in high school. So time to go to school, Mr. Schiller said he would drive Robin and I up to A&M to take us to school. He was a district engineer of the highway department, and he was at work every morning at 7:30 at Columbus. And he said, "Boys, we're going to go a little early because I got to be back for work." So I think we left about 2 o'clock. We got to College Station, and I can vividly recall right in front of the mess hall, and this had to be around 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and the street lights were all on, and there was kind of a fog. It was the most eerie looking damn thing I ever saw in my life. He opens the door, we take our trunk out, he's gone.
And
he got us back to Columbus by 7:30, and there Robert and I were, not a soul on the street, nothing going, and a Foot Locker. That I will never forget. That was the introduction to, as a freshman day.
had you visited Uncle Lee when he was at A&M?
Yes, indeed.
Hey, he would come there and
Oh, yeah.
visit me.
He was company commander of E Company Infantry.
How did you end up going to A&M, Uncle Lee? Because
No, I had a scholarship offered to me to play baseball at Rice. And my whole plan was to become a coach because I liked athletics, basketball, baseball mostly, and football. And so that was really my main interest. And I didn't know much about A&M, but just the fact that the school was there and it offered all these many courses and in the military, it all interested me, so I decided in favor of A&M, although I was not offered a scholarship.
How did you pay it?
How did I
How
play?
did you pay your tuition?
Mother gave me the money,
Oh,
and I went there and did play baseball for 2 years and played football for 2 years, but I didn't really do well at either one. I was not on the first team. So then I gave up the idea of becoming a football coach and thought pretty well of working at some refinery later on, and with that then I took chemical engineering. When I graduated, jobs were scarce and we were in a deep depression, and so I went back and worked on my master's degree, which I received in 1934.
Well, now your story of hitchhiking to Beaumont, and what was that? And there was a job offering there.
Yeah, I was offered a laboratory job at Sun Oil Company,
But then you heard that Bayreuth had a,
and I
yeah,
met Mike Albuty there
Yeah.
in Beaumont, whom I knew at A&M. He graduated before I did. And I talked to him and he said, well, when did you take at A&M? I told him. He said, I know somebody looking for a chemist or chemical engineer. So with that, he got on the phone. And he had quite a bit of influence because he bottled Bayreuth mud and chemicals. And so he called him on the phone and talked to him for about 30 or 45 minutes and told him like he knew me real well, although he didn't know me that well. And so that with that, then I went on to Houston and they offered me a job. I didn't know much about the business, so I went to somebody in Humboldt, which now is Exxon. And he told me it ought to be a real interesting company and one that had a lot of future to it and growth. So with that then I went in and they asked me, said, how much do you want to, what do you want for a salary? And I said, oh, I don't know, maybe $150. I said, okay. And I could have got just as well 175 or maybe 200. But it looked so good to me that I accepted quickly and went to work for Bayreuth and stayed with them the rest of my working career.
And you got that first job in what, 34? Right after you got your master's?
yeah.
1934.
In fact, then, the job that you went to Beaumont for is the one that your buddy Benny Gottlieb, you saw him and Benny took the job?
Yeah, Benny came to me there in Houston and visited me in my office and I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm looking for a job. So I told him the one that I turned down in Beaumont. He went there and called on this man that was head of the laboratory and got the job.
I said he had a brother, Sid, who I was classmates with all through A&M.
Huh.
And we were very close. And Sid kept talking about that happening, and then when we got out of school, I didn't recall what happened to him. And then my going to A&M, I figured if my brother can do it, I can do it. That's the only thing that I went by. Well, when I got up there and decided to chem engineering, I got into the E-battery field artillery, where nobody studied. They were all petroleum engineers at regular courses. So I said, well, if I must get in this thing, I got to get the hell out of this company. So I got over to chemical warfare and did pretty well there and became first sergeant my junior year, like he had been first sergeant over in the infantry. And he was paying my way through school. So I'd run out of money, and so I'd write a note to Bud, I lost my slide rule again. He'd send me another $20 or whatever it was, but I think I lost that slide rule about 4 or 5 times by the time I graduated.
I think we ought to go back as children when I visited the Huebel family, Grandpa Huebel and
Uh-huh.
Grandma. They lived on about 200 acres of land in a little log cabin type house. And there was no sidewalks or anything. I mean, just plain old dirt, not even grass in the yard. And there's a number of dogs there. And the thing I always remember, which was really sad, is that when the dog dug a hole and went and laid down some other place, that there's going to be a death in the family.
Oh, what?
A death in the family.
Ah.
But this was during World War II or World War I, epidemic flu, pneumonia came through, and Grandma Huebel got sick and died as a result of it. Grandpa survived, and then later on he died. But it was very primitive-like, and the place was on the old Shaw's Bend Highway. Later on in life, we decided, John and I, that we'd like to buy the place, and with the family, Huebel was quite big, and there was no one Huebel that was going to own the place, it seemed, so we laid our hands off the deal, and it was later sold.
How did your grandfather die?
Grandfather Huebel.
I think he committed suicide.
It was not talked about at all.
No, never discussed.
It was a pretty sad affair from what we gathered, and we never really heard, the children never heard it discussed.
Oh, the other thing I remember about him is that he had quite a big mustache. And drinking coffee, he would pour the hot coffee in the saucer and then hold up and drink out of the saucer rather than the cup. And the coffee would accumulate around his beard, and it would just drip off of his beard or his mustache. It was quite a sight.
Do you remember them, Daddy?
I remember he and I remember the coffee. I remember drinking the coffee out of the saucer and blowing it and drinking it. And I kept thinking, it's gonna get wet.
What
And
about
everybody
this?
talked German. They were all
Oh, yeah.
German descent.
Now that's another thing. Even when we went to Shaw's Bend to Mother's family, the Struces, they talked to all the children in German, and we answered in English.
Uh-huh.
And that went, I guess, until we were 8, 10, 12 years old. The conversation was in German, and when we would answer them in English. So that,
Yeah, so both your parents spoke German? Were they raised speaking German?
Yes.
yes,
Did they talk German to each other?
Yeah.
yeah.
How did they meet, your parents?
We don't know, but, well, they live close together.
Okay.
It was a community.
In Shaw's
Shaw's
Bend?
Bend.
Yeah.
What about your grandparents on your mother's side? What were they like?
Grandpa Struce. Grandma Struce.
Grandpa Struce was a craftsman, and he was a house contractor. We didn't know too much about his background. Grandma Struce was from China, wasn't she?
I think so.
And we really did not know. Grandpa did his work around the house, and if he Saturday afternoon and Sunday, when he finished with his meal, he'd take off to downtown Columbus and play dominoes at the pool hall. And he was excellent straight domino player. And he didn't hang around the house too much. But he had 2 men on his staff, and they built houses all over the area.
Martha, let's pause it.
That was when the storm came down, Glenn. and Donna always got excited when a storm started brewing. And we had one of the most solid houses in town, but right in the middle of the storm, we've got to go to the depot. We've got to leave the house. We've got to go to the depot. And I can so vividly recall that his roommate and he and I held hands, walked down the road, and it was blowing so darn hard that sometimes we couldn't walk into it. We stood there and then walked. And we finally got to the depot, and then the storm passed and went on back home. But
So that was for safety?
yeah, she felt safer there at the depot than she did in the house.
Well, what about Uncle Willie? Tell a little bit about.
Well, he, of course, was like our dad. I mean, he assumed a lot of responsibilities and helped Nana just an awful lot. A whole lot. In fact, he was very instrumental. Is that thing on?
Mm-hmm.
When the trial came, when Dad was acting the kill in the railroad yard, the railroad was just impossible to deal with. And so Uncle Willie decided on a guy named Hollis Massey there in Columbus to be the lawyer. And this was a, because Bud recalls that, but I remember the trial taking place, and it was touch and go for quite some time. But she won, he won the case and received a settlement out of the railroad, but had they not sued and gone to court,
When
would
they
not
got
have gotten the thing. Isn't that about the way it was?
Right. There was no such thing as a pension or anything like that, I mean.
Yeah.
And, after Dad died, well, the only thing that we had then was what we got out of the railroad company. And that was not a whole lot. So Mother went ahead and put some beds upstairs and rented out those beds to
The railroad.
railroad people that came in from Houston and San Antonio. They would spend the night and then go back, so that was her only outside income.
I didn't know she did that.
Also, when we had an apartment downstairs, and I remember the high school teacher who was the Glidden superintendent lived in the house. And one day he called me in at the school and he said, I have this problem at the house. He says, I can't seem to keep my cigarettes around. Well, of course, he'd have his pack of cigarettes around his apartment there at the house, and several of the neighbors and I knew where they were. So, we did quite a bit of smoking of those Ready Roll cigarettes.
Would you say that Uncle Willie is the main influence, the male of your life after
Oh,
your dad died?
definitely.
Yeah, right.
And he had the butcher shop, and
He was considered highly successful in his era. He had the butcher shop, and he was quite an active rancher. And he started right there, right near where the old home place was, Nana, and from that little beginning, he would slaughter a calf and sell the meat. And from that one, he went into the butcher shop business and did quite well. But he helped Nana just more than anyone else by far, and his judgment was excellent. So it saved her. Of course, she had her sister there in town, you know.
Aunt Clara.
Was good. But that's the way I recall. The others were not that close with her.
No. The other thing was, that in the very beginning, he would carry the meat across the railroad, the bridge over the Colorado River, and bring it on into Glidden. And that's the first market that he had, and that's the way he operated. Finally, he moved or opened up a meat shop, butcher shop in Columbus, and then he went on into barbecuing meat there. And I worked there during the summer when I didn't go to school, selling barbecue and sausage and so on and so forth.
See, he was the one that, when I got out of the army and went to the valley working for Lane Wells, he, a local person in Columbus built another theater. And so he had competition with the Arctic Theater. So it was then that he offered me the job of, would you be interested in coming to Columbus and take over and run the show, with the understanding eventually that I'll help you get into business. So that was a decision that we made at that time, and that's how we got to Columbus, was through that proposition. So it worked out very well, but that, we had to make the decision, were we going to pursue the oil patch or go that route, and that's the route we chose.
I remember too that Uncle Willie at his house, we would go there, and it would also be Uncle Alvin from Eagle Lake, and they played the music. Alvin played the violin, and Uncle Willie played the trombone, and his wife played the piano. And they were fairly well accomplished, and
Wow.
I'm not sure they ever took a lesson in their life, but
There was musical talent on one side of the fence, not on the other.
well, we did get Bill to play the accordion one time. He took lessons, and he could play pretty good, but we'd have somebody over, we'd have a little group over at the house, entertain them, and I'd want to get Bill to play the accordion for the people, and he didn't like that very much.
Yeah,
So finally, he kind of gave up on it.
on that.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about when you were little, I know you didn't have Christmas at all like we have it now, but did you get together with Uncle Willie's family for Christmas or holidays or what?
Not really. We had our Christmas at home, and the tree was in the living room, and we would not be allowed to be close to the room. We'd be off somewhere in the house. Christmas Eve night, after it got dark, there'd be some noise out there. Well, Santa Claus apparently is there, you know, and after they opened the door and we went in, and there was a tree and our gifts. And normally the gifts were merely clothes. There were no such thing as toys.
I see that happened. That was what we had while he was at home. When he went off to school, then we went into town to Uncle Willie's Christmas. And I can remember that I always found out what I was going to have for Christmas, because I knew the closet where Nana kept things. And it was a baseball bat, a club, something.
What was it like at your house when your dad was still alive? You know, what kind of...
The town?
No, but I mean in your house, was there a lot of laughter? Was it happy? Was it kind of serious, or what was it like?
Well, it was more serious than laughter. Being German, everything revolved around work around the house, cooking and washing. Outside had a big kettle where she washed her clothes, had a big old stick and stirred it around, and so on and so forth. And then would hang the clothes out on wash lines and do all the cooking, and we would have a garden, nice-sized garden, and everybody pitched in and worked in there.
And chickens?
I had to always dry the dishes after dinner at night after they were washed. It was one of my jobs, and I was rewarded a little bit, but not very much. With that, I generally went by the store after school and buy a bar of candy. That was fine.
That whole period of time was during the Depression.
Yeah.
And the German people knew how to get that. The only life they knew was in doing it the hard way. And it was a struggle. It was a struggle for all of them. The thing I remember, he was talking about there, that we had a hog pen. And then when the time, the hog was in the winter time, it was time to slaughter the hog, it was kind of a neighborhood deal. And they had the boiling water there, and they would scald the thing and then scrape him and then cut him open, and the smokehouse that Dad had built was just beautiful for that. So they'd hang it in the smokehouse, and then there's a place to have a fire, and it would smoke right through the thing, and then people would take their cut of meat, and it was quite an affair like that.
So was it a big neighborhood? Did neighbors gather
Well,
together or not
Not
really?
that big, but
Not really.
he needed help, but they needed help to do it.
Oh, we had a windmill, had our own water supply, wasn't too good. We also had a cow that would get up and milk, and every Sunday morning, Mother would get up, go out there and pick up a fryer and kill it and pick it, and we'd have fried chicken for dinner and homemade ice cream.
Wow.
So, but it was just work. They were just constantly busy doing things.
As a teenager, as a preteen, Bud was gone, and of course the barn and everything was there. And above Glidden was called on the hill, the blacksmith, and they had donkeys. And they turned the donkeys loose in the spring to graze around and get some grass to eat, and they'd come into town. And as 12-year-olds, the word would get out, the donkeys are out. So we'd catch those donkeys and ride out into the pasture and have rodeos. Well, you'd sit on a donkey and he'd just sit there. He wouldn't do a donkey, he wouldn't buck or do anything. So we had some corn cobs along. And so a guy would get on the donkey, and then another guy would raise the tail and stick a corn cob in there. And we'd have the damnedest rodeo you ever saw. So we soon found out that they never reared up, they always kicked. Trying to kick that darn cob. Well, all you had to do was get on the front, you could turn around on it, front shoulder, sit either way, and just ride the old donkey around. So it was, but then all of a sudden we'd see the blacks coming, we'd get off the donkeys and they'd take them back home again.
What about church? Did you go to church as kids or?
My
Yeah,
dad was
well,
Catholic.
I went to the Baptist church in Glidden. They only had one church. And I remember that they bought me an outfit kind of knicker-like, and I thought I was really something wearing that. And then a little later on, long pants. But I went to Sunday school there, and then also would attend church.
Did you do that, Dad?
No, at that time, Reverend Flockmeyer was in Columbus, and Nana and Dad had died, and we went to
Okay.
I want to know what it was like for you when Dad went off to college.
Lonesome.
Yeah.
Lonesome. Mainly because of Nana. I mean, she was lonesome.
Were you like her
Well,
chief
yeah,
aide?
Yeah. He was gone, and then she had to occupy herself, and she didn't do too well. And somebody gave her some wine, and she started drinking wine one night. I can remember this so well, and she didn't know what she was doing. You know, she got plastered and sitting on the back porch.
Here, we'll stop it there.
One thing I'm curious about is that so many of you all went to college, which I think is interesting coming from a small town like that. I mean, both of you went, and
Ruby and Tupi and
all of
Bixie
them
and
went.
all them went to college, right?
They all went to Texas.
But Elmer, did he go to college?
He went
They
to
say-
San Marcos,
Yeah.
didn't he?
But it's mainly the influence of Uncle Willie and Aunt Jenny, Uncle Willie's wife. Her sister was one of the best-known educators at St. Houston.
Oh.
She was an English teacher and the head of the department there, I think she was, and recognized the country over. The whole family thought education, so that when the time came, everybody was going to go to college in one way and make it one way or the other.
who was the oldest? Who went first?
Bud was first. And Leona didn't go to college, but Bud was first.
Well, the idea was that they didn't want us to have to go through life as they did.
Uh-huh.
They want us to be educated and have a better job and a better income. They knew that of people that had done that, and that would be a better way of life.
Did other people of your friends, did your friends go to college, Uncle Lee, from high school?
Not too many. The number of them were from the country, and they finished high school, and that was the end of their education.
Uh-huh.
A few others did go to college, like Red Talbot, but he didn't stay there very long, maybe a year or 2 years, and he dropped out.
You had one of your buddies that at Columbus went when I came.
Charlie Schultz went
Yeah.
off somewhere,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I don't recall where he went to college,
Yeah.
but he was real good in high school and did well, and I've kind of lost track of him.
Were you the smartest in your class, do you think?
I don't know that I was.
One of the smartest.
We talked about who Dad dated in high school. How about you, Uncle John?
How about what?
Who'd you
Who
date?
did you date?
I had our activity was the area town dances, and they were big. And the boys would stag, and the girls would stag. And we met the area crowd real well. And actually, during the high school there, it was more fun to go to one of those dances than it was to stay home with a date and just kind of piddle around. we went to LaGrange, to Schulenburg, to East Bernard, and it was big time. Big bands came in and played. It was great. I really had the girlfriend situation was not that big in our crowd. Ruby and Robert, I think, were the two that I think they went together from the time they were juniors in high school until they got married. That was pretty unusual.
We were really more interested in sports, be it baseball or football or basketball or whatever. I mean, our main interest was in that, although we didn't shut off from the girls. We went to the dances, and I couldn't dance very well. When I went to A&M, I ended up taking dance lessons just so, because Elvira was a good dancer, and I wanted to be one. I never did seem to get too good at it.
I can remember the dances over at Borden, and this was pretty good dance bands, and there were two sisters from Weimar, Casper's sisters, and they were excellent dancers. And they just took it upon themselves to teach me to get to the dancing, and I took advantage of it. We'd had the whole crowd, every town had a crowd that went to dances in the area, and it was quite an activity. So I learned pretty well about that.
Tell them the time that you came out to Los Angeles to visit me. Your mother was there, and we went to Palomar dance, big band dancing. Go ahead and you can finish the story.
Well, now this was Glen Gray and the whole up top, and it was the whole block big, but you could stag it. And I think it was my junior year in high school, and Bud was working in L.A. And Nana and I went out and stayed with him that summer. And he would give me a couple of bucks, or it cost $1 to get in, and drinks were 25 or 50 cents like that. And I can remember one night, this beautiful gal from the Midwest somewhere, and so I wanted to offer her a drink, but I knew I just had enough money for one drink. So, of course, I ordered the drink and said, "What about you?" And I told her I did the drink.
Oh, well, we never did get over that. That's time.
Now, were you working for Bayroyd then?
Yes.
In
Yeah.
LA?
Yeah.
I just worked for the one company all my life. And at one time Mother was there, and we went to Hollywood up on the hill where they had the theater. And it took a while, a winding road and so on, to get up in there and then go through the gate. Got to the gate though at this time, and they asked for money and found out that I left my bill fold at home. But we got in, we saw the play, everything was worked out really good. I did send them the money though. I felt a lot better about it.
Uh-huh. What's your, do you have any big memories of college? Like what stands out in your minds about your college life?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, tell about, you went and snuck into somebody's garage to sleep?
Well, the story goes that as freshmen, I was roomming with Fitzgerald from San Antonio, who was just about as Jewish as he could be. And every night they'd come in and drown him out. Well, of course,
What does that mean?
buckets of water and just let him have it in his bunk.
Literally.
So it wasn't long. I was on the top bunk, and the other roommate was in the middle, and Sam was darn sure on the bottom bunk. And there was an airing out that took place every so often where the sophomores would have their Sam Brown belt, and they'd air get the freshmen out of their rooms and just give them a lick every chance they could, you know. So this one particular night, the hot air out freshman, and I looked up, and the whole damn place was filled up with the sophomores looking at me, and I jumped from the top bunk out into the doorway and got out of there without getting a single lick. So I went downstairs and I hid in a hedge right there at the YMCA there. And here came about 50 or 75 sophomores jogging down the road looking for freshmen. So when they came by, I shot out right in the middle of them and jogged with them around the campus. And finally said, hey, this guy here doesn't have a belt.
There was a lot of hazing that went on when we were in college. I know the times that I would have to take a pillow with me to the class to sit down. I just couldn't sit down on anything hard.
Because people had
On
paddled
account of-
you?
Yeah, on account of the fact that they hazed me. And then when I became a sophomore, I took a baseball bat and cut it down to where it was just a thin board. And I would use that to haze freshmen. But even though being a sophomore didn't rule out that the senior might haze you.
Yeah.
So that went on at A&M quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it wasn't good, I can tell you that, because it was
Yeah, I
very
bet
painful.
you weren't ready for it at all, were you? Did you know that was going to happen when you went to
No,
A&M?
I didn't know that was going to happen. Sure did.
Because Daddy, you probably knew
Oh.
because of what Uncle
Oh,
Lee
yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it had toned down quite a bit by the time. Several had gotten hurt, and as viciously as they were, and so they cut it down a great deal. But it still went on some, but not that bad.
What about Uncle Lee? What about in World War II?
Wait a second. This is a good place to stop because we have,
We need to get another tape.
well, we have 8 minutes, so we might as well. Okay.
one thing we failed to mention was the fact that Dad was a big duck hunter. He would go to Garwood and hunt in the rice fields. Bring back a sack full of ducks, and they would be picked, and the feathers would be used to make comforts and feather beds and pillows. They would never buy a so-called pillow at the store. But this is the way they lived. I mean, everything was done by themselves in self-sufficiency.
Well, did Nana make the pillows and the comforters?
Yeah, did that. And then of course she made some
I see you.
fine, not blankets, but pattern,
Quilts.
handmade
Quilts.
In fact, there's one or two there in my house, emerald days.
Oh, really? That she made?
Yeah, she
Oh,
made
cool.
that one.
Uh-huh.
And I believe you have one here.
Really?
Did you ever go hunting with your
Oh
dad?
yeah, later on in life, Dad bought me a shotgun and I went hunting with him and got real interested. I mean, I was more interested in duck hunting than anything else. John came along and he was more interested in rifle hunting, killing deer and the like, rather than killing with the shotgun. But
Who
That's
took
one of every
you
year.
hunting, Dad?
Well, I want to tell my one, see, I was 7 years old when he died, and I can vividly recall we had a touring car, and he came back from a duck hunt from Garwood, and the whole back seat on the floorboards was filled with ducks. And so we went over to the depot, and he parked out with the depot, and every other one of the railroaders who came by, he handed out ducks. And so this is the memory that I can so clearly remember him passing out ducks. Time he had the whole back seat was full of ducks.
Oh my gosh.
I just vividly recall that. I was 5 or 6 years old, I guess. Kind of a memory bank that Buzz had when he was a young child.
also we did dove hunting. We went to Uncle Louis, Leona's place, or rather father, and there we hunted dove and did quite well and enjoyed the activity. You remember that?
Yeah, very much. Now,
Daddy,
But
who
we
took
never
you
did
hunting?
hunt on the Huebel place.
You didn't?
No.
Who took you hunting, Daddy? Because when you
Uh,
were young.
Bud took me hunting. I did very little hunting early, but then Uncle Willie took us deer hunting. And the deer hunting came by way of Uncle Willie. And he had 3 or 4 pastures in the county. And there's always one pasture or the other that had the bucks that year. And the only thing that I didn't like about it was that he would get up at 5 o'clock to hunt and then come back. He wanted to do a day's work. I was completely fatigued, and I didn't care about doing any work after that.
So
we
did you
we
work?
learned how to hunt.
Did you work for him at the butcher shop or
Yeah, sort of. No, not really.
not really?
Not as a child, no. But he was a big hunter, and the duck hunting was a big thing. In fact, the shotgun we have was a brand new gun that our dad bought. It was a full choke, 12 gauge pump. That he was an excellent hunter. But that's all he cared about was duck hunting.
Did you read when you were kids? Did you read in your house?
Never had time to read. We always had something to do.
We were busy.
Go out and play or what? We didn't do any
You
reading.
didn't read?
You were either going to be outside playing or working, huh? Doing sports.
Oh, another thing that in my life, I delivered papers. I'd go to the depot early morning in the San Antonio, Houston, Southern Pacific would come by and the guy would throw the whole bundle of papers out and I'd go pick them up and did them, worked them out, and then I delivered them and ended up buying a bicycle. I did that for years, and my big problem was there was always some ladies or widow ladies that wouldn't pay me on time. And I had quite a problem with that. But at least I made some spending money doing that. And then a little later on, when I was there about high school, I worked out at the gravel pit. And I remember one time I almost got run over by a car on the tracks. I fell off when we tried to catch it while it was moving forward, and I lost my grip. and fell down on the ground. But I came out of it and never did tell Mother about it.
Well, that would have sent her right over.
And like one time when I was playing baseball, I got Charlie Kearney threw the ball that he could throw it hard. And they put me in as a pinch hitter and the ball hit me right up my heart. I went home and I was spitting blood, but I never told Mother about it. Those were the days.
That's the way he got hurt. We got hurt rodeoing with the donkeys. And then we had, a little after that, one of the friends had a dairy, and we had rodeos every Sunday afternoon. And I can recall this one particular, it was a Jersey bull, and I had a rope surcingle, and he really kicked hard several times, and there was clearance, and I'd go up, and one time I went up and came down while he came up for a second, and it hit me so hard that I couldn't breathe. I came home that night, and I was just taking a half breath, and Nana kept, there's something wrong with it, and I just would, no.
Did she know what you were doing?
She didn't know what we were doing. But it took a few weeks for me to be able to start breathing normal, and
Oh, wow.
it was pretty good blow. But then we go back to WW2 now for a little bit. Bud had his time there in the Aleutian Islands, so he was pretty isolated there.
Yeah, I was on ADAC
They-
Island. We went there to run the Jap side of the Aleutian Islands. We stopped at ADAC to build an airfield so we could start bombing over there. And it was really a desolate place to be there in that kind of weather, living in tents for a while until we got Quonset huts. And those places would be covered with snow just overnight at times, and had a real problem digging out and going about our business. Planes would leave there, and you could hear them coming back, but it was so closed in that they couldn't land, and we lost PBYs and the like. It was very boring and terrible life.
You made quite a bit of money playing polka dolls, I recall.
Oh yeah, I carried a money belt on me and at least $1,000 most of the time. The rest of it I'd send home periodically and send it to Mother Willars, and that made the down payment on the house when I got out of service.
Well, and you made money playing gin rummy too, didn't you? No?
Not so much there, there was primarily poker.
The way I knew it at Raven Country Club and elsewhere, he didn't win too much money playing golf, but before he would pay off playing golf, he'd go in and play gin rummy. It was the time he finished with his gin rummy, he didn't own it anymore. My experience with the war, favorite story is that we went through Harvard and MIT in electronics, down to Florida, and for aircraft warning schools. And all the way through Harvard and MIT, guys just busted out. They couldn't pass the course, so they were sent down to Florida, and they became the cadres of the aircraft warning organizations that were going to go overseas. So there we stayed and went through the courses, and the time we got down there, they were in the vacancies of the captains and the majors, and we came down as electronics. So that didn't sit too well, and we sent over to Hawaii, and I was assigned an aircraft warning outfit, and there was a battalion, and this major, anything a soldier did out of line, he'd throw the book at them. He'd send them in, turn them in, and at that time, it got on their records. What if they got drunk and AWOL or what, they got confined. So I just flat blew my stack with him. I said, "You're ruining a hell of a lot of good men." He said, "Well, if you're so damn good about it, I'll send you to Hilo, and send you those guys and see what you can do. I said, I would like that. So I guess over a period of a year, I got about 200 guys that come out of the stockades. And I regularly call a routine. They'd come into the office and I'd say, you got privileges here and you got obligations. And if you keep your nose clean and do your job, you get off, you play ball, you go to the movies, you get a 3-day pass, but not till you've earned it. So I took that outfit then to Huebel. So we had some guys who had such a bad record that they weren't allowed to go any further overseas because of that record. But the whole time we were there on the island, there was just no problem with it. So on Huebel, it was just a close-knit family, and the highlight story there is that we went in on D+7, and the first thing we had to do was dig the foxholes, dig the holes and get out, because they always mortared through shells from the north end to the south end. And we were digging those holes about the first or second night, and someone hollered, gas. Well, to go overseas, you had your gas mask and you put the clips on the hose, so in case they got wet, they wouldn't get into the canister and run the canister. So all of them had clamps on the hoses where you couldn't breathe. You couldn't breathe with a face mask. So we get over there and I hollered gas, and all the men took out their gas masks, put them on, and they're choking to death. Luckily, there was no gas at all, but it was the damnedest commotion that we ever had. Just like a bunch of kids and foxholes dug. I can't breathe.
And where was that?
That's what Huebel.
Okay.
Yeah, we fought the war right there, but we were not there during the rough time that the Marines had.
So that was after you were there or before you were there? The rough time.
The rough time was with the Marines before.
Before you
were
got
there?
there.
Yeah. In fact, though, we had a few casualties right in the outfit, but it was the Japs who were still in caves that came out later and came down and caused a bunch of damage. But
How long were you there?
2 years.
And you were doing it was radar.
I had the first height finder in the Central Pacific. It was an antenna that bobbed like this, so it could hit the plane and give the altitude. The others went at 360 degrees this way, and we would come in with the height. And so it worked a beautiful operation, but it didn't last too long, and then the war was over. But the B-29s would come in there and land hurt, and so the Japs were still bombing, and we were right there on the air base, and had sandbagged around, and the 29s would come in and crash land at times, and then the Japs would start shooting at them, and we would get down in our sandbags and didn't come out of there for some overnight. And that didn't last but about several months, and then the war was over, so we lucked out on that.
Dad, tell us about when you were in Hawaii and you saw your college friend.
Oh yeah, this was an old roommate that I went through school with, and he was sent to the South Pacific as a chemical officer. And then I got out of the chemical warfare and got into the radar training, and then I was sent to Hawaii. And one day at the PX, the soldiers were coming in and out of the door, and I saw this guy coming, and so I opened the door for him, and there's my roommate walking out of the door. And it was Mike Connor. I said, what in the hell are you doing here? And he says, well, I was so far down in the South Pacific, the only way I could get back to the States was to come back and take pilot training. So he was a bomber pilot that was down in the South Pacific, and there he was on leave, and we went to the PX for something, and we met right there in the door.
Oh my gosh.
And did he take you on a...
He took me on his B-26, and it was just kind of like a rattle trap. There was vibration, there was a 4-engine bomber, and we flew half a day down into the Pacific at some base and landed and then came back. And I sure was glad I wasn't on that. It was not very good.
Dad, how long were you in the Aleutian Islands?
Some solo in the Army, I was in about 4 years.
Uh-huh.
And in the Aleutian Islands, I was there almost 3 years, and then maybe a half a year or so at Fort Richardson,
Where's that?
Anchorage,
Oh.
Alaska. We had a regular operation there for the airfield and so on.
So what was your particular job in the Aleutian Islands?
I was a chemical officer, and then one time the mustard gas bombs began to leak, and I was put in charge of bringing back those bombs back to the States, and we loaded them up on a ship in Seward, Alaska, and brought them back to Vancouver, I think, put them on rail cars, and I rode the caboose, and we took them down through Alaska, and then finally we went on into the States, and they were put there at an arsenal. And as I understand it, they were finally picked up there and taken to the Atlantic Ocean and put out in the water and disposed of. Whereas they could have done it in the Gulf of Alaska just as well.
Yeah. So what did you do for 3 years in the Aleutian Islands? What were you, what kinds of,
What does a chemical officer
yeah,
do?
what kinds of things
Well, I
were
kept
you?
track of the munitions, chemical munitions, and I was.
Was that an
also-
air base? Was there, were
It
there
was
planes?
strictly an air base. And the Japs supposedly were at Kiska, and that too, over further out. And down the road, they finally sent some troops in to invade rather than to use us. And they came, fresh troops came in and stopped over there and then went on, and they went in from 2 different sides and actually ended up shooting at each other. And finally found out that the Japs had left in their little submarines and were gone.
Wow.
So the whole thing was a fiasco. Terrible. And here we had been there several years, you know, and fighting the weather more than anything else.
I've got one thing to tell about when we were on the Big Island, and I had all these guys coming into the outfit. We played softball. Well, a lot of the guys had been hardball players and darn good athletes, but they did not play it much. Within about a year, those guys converted into softball players, and we won everything on the island as far as tournaments. So we were sent over, we represented the Big Island over in Honolulu to play the Mid-Central Pacific softball tournament. And a kid from Kansas was a pitcher. He couldn't believe the speed he could pick up with the pitching of softball. And we got, I think the final game went about 12 or 14 innings with no hits. And another outfit from somewhere else in the Pacific beat us 1-0 in about the 14th inning.
Oh, wow.
So it was our diversion each day that when they were off duty, we went to this goop place over there. The Hawaiians had no ballpark, and where we played our baseball. But the softball was just was a big sport, and it carried us to the thing.
Good. How long were you in Hawaii before you went to Iwo Jima?
About 2 years over on the Big Island.
And then how long were you in Iwo Jima?
A little over a year, I guess. Just about a little over a year. When the war was over, when they declared when the Japs surrendered, it was about 3 or 4 months before it got us off of there. So I went down to the Seabees and checked out 4 big old Rio dump trucks, a maintainer, and all that was volcanic ash on the island, but one area had some clay. And so I built a baseball diamond out just right off of that ash, and it turned out well, the guys were very talented with the equipment. So we built a baseball diamond there and played ball just with day in and day out. So it gave the men something to do all the time. And all I did was sign my name to all that equipment. It was a damn thing. I couldn't care less about it.
Whereas we played poker every night.
Because you had to do inside stuff, right? Because it was so
there
cold.
There were 2 or 3 of us, or 4 of us that played all the time. And then we bring in or let in 2 or 3 others and we'd fight for their money. And after we got their money, then we'd fight among ourselves and to take the money.
So how was your mother holding up during all this with both of her boys gone? Did she write you?
She did well because Clara was her companion back then, and she was very close in the families.
And she was still in Glidden?
She was still in Glidden. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Well, Uncle Lee, what about Aunt Willois and Bill were in Palestine, right?
Yes.
So talk about meeting Mom.
Oh, I met her out in Los Angeles, working for Bayreuth. Then was a man who was the advertising manager, and his wife was from Oklahoma, and her mother, her husband had left her, and her mother was a sister to Willois's mother. Now, not necessarily a sister, but they were related. And but there was Virginia, there was Eddie's wife, and then there were 2 or 3 other cousins there. And right after graduated from SMU, her mother brought Lois out to California, and they visit their cousins, and then Eddie, who was with Bayreuth, got me a date with Lois. And that's how we got acquainted.
And what year was that?
1940.
But she was engaged to someone at the time, right?
Beg pardon?
She was engaged to someone at the time?
Well, she was going with this
Dumbass.
cousin of a woman,
Oh, uh-huh.
Tommy Womack, who's real sick.
So she ditched him for you?
Yeah.
So
And
So
then,
we had a good time. We got engaged in a very short period of time. I called Dad on Mom and asked permission to marry Willois, and that was it. I mean, her mother left her out there with the cousins, so we got better acquainted.
and how'd you find out Uncle Lee was going to get married, Daddy? Did he?
I don't really recall.
You don't recall?
Well, my story there at A&M was that Uncle Bob was a year ahead of me in chemical warfare, and he was well, as a sophomore he was top sophomore in the outfit, and as a junior he was a master sergeant, and he asked me one day that said his sister was going to be coming to visit, would I care to have a date with his sister? And I said, you're darn right. It didn't matter to me who his sister was. If Bob Adams asked me to take out his sister, I was just, so that's how I met her, was through him.
And were you a sophomore?
I think so. I was right at the end of the sophomore year, into the junior year. So then when he graduated, then she started coming down for the court trips, and the usual romance like that took place.
I guess one question that someone wanted to ask is, to what do you owe your success and longevity? Your success in life.
Well, I don't think I was all that successful. I had a job with Bayreuth to begin with, and just kind of gradually worked myself up. And of course, 4 years of that was in the Army, but that counted time with the company. My success, if any, was my interest in the work that I did, and I worked hard at it to do as well as possible. As far as life goes, I've always been very active, and my exercise was good, and I guess like John said earlier, or when we were talking about the genes in the family, I mean, most of the folks lived a good long time, and those that didn't do so well had heart attacks, and there was very little done for heart problems at that time. And they didn't have anything like pacemakers and blood thinners and what have you. So they didn't get to live as long as we have the opportunity to live. That's about it.
I think it was the genes in our family. I mean, everybody, mainly on our mother's side that we knew were wanted to get with it. They were objective in what they were going after, and the desire to do well was there. The other side of the family didn't show that. On the Huebel side, there were a number of them who were really good people, but the farming, or wherever they were, was good enough, and do the best with what they got. The desire really wasn't too much on that side, but it was so on the true side, and I think that's, and being raised like that, mainly with them, is where we picked it up. And I think that contributed more than anything else, so that we kind of went, we didn't have much to begin with, but we saw what was there that he had. That was primarily, of course, Uncle Willie was instrumental with us in a lot of different facets. Where he didn't, goofing off just didn't cotton to him at all, and so we knew pretty well we had to get with it.
Another question I have is that you both have or had long marriages. What do you think is the key to your successful marriage?
Now what?
Successful marriage. What's the key? Dad, what do you say?
Well, this working together, working out problems. We had problems, but we didn't just make that big an issue out of it. We eventually solved them and forget it and go on and try to live a happy life and have as much fun as we could, or had time to have fun. I think that's about it.
I can someone tell you what it was with us. I was in Honey Grove, and I think it was the night before we were going to get married. And the Adams had this black, who was a maid, and she was a very personable person. And I can remember pulling us off to the side the evening before and said, I'm going to talk to you two. Now there are going to come times with you two that somebody's going to have rocks in their jaw. And when if you have, you see that she's got rocks in her jaw, you just shut up and don't say nothing. Leave her alone. And if you go over there and see that he's got rocks, leave him be for a while. He'll cool off. He'll get along. And I thought about that for years.
I never heard
It
that.
was excellent philosophy. If you can just stay shut while the other's blowing their stuff, it's going to be a lot easier and get over with a lot quicker. And it can work both ways.
That's good.
Okay.
Uncle Lee, did you, what is the occasion of this? What are we doing today? You want to talk about what we're celebrating?
The occasion is celebrating my birthday, thanks to
Which
also
one?
here for setting up the party. I was 90 years old this past Monday, March 18, means that I was born in 1912, and she had a party for me, or as the children did, when I was 80, and so the 10 years had passed, and here I am 90, and we're here for that party, and John's birthday is really close by, and he can tell us about that.
Well, I could see that with my brother's birthday, as everything happened before, whatever suited him is the way we worked it out. And I felt like my little birthday, as young as I was not as meaningful as what he has attained, but the family has taken care of the rest of it, and I think it's been a very interesting session about the whole thing.
And you'll be 83
I
on
will,
Wednesday, right?
that is true, 83.
That's right.
And he's, the 90 is the big.
That is a biggie.
The biggie, that is the big.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yay!
Was it paused that whole time?
Upstairs.
And
Well, Dad, you were talking about it.
Yeah, yeah.
and you
And
said it didn't have indoor plumbing at
The
first.
upstairs comes in the second phase of my notes.
Okay, well, start with the beginning.
You and Red Talbot.
Okay.
Okay, in the beginning there was the
That's fine.
That's good.
Are you ready?
I'm recording.
Oh, you
Okay.
are?
I've been recording.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Okay, start then.
So the house was basically, we remembered that Grandpa and our dad built the house, and the material was ordered from Sears Roebuck for the total amount the house was to be, and when they finished the construction of it, there was one plank left over. Now that is my recollection of the story. Mary Catherine said that she heard Grandpa said that our dad planned it, the house, and they ordered it, he built it, but the credit went to our dad for sizing up the amount of material. That's my version. I don't know what yours is on that.
No, I don't recall very much about the building of the house. But Dad,
You were born in that house, in that
I was
two-story
born in
house.
the house, but Dad was a good carpenter, and I think that he planned well, and I remember too that when the strike occurred on the railroad, that he then moved to or worked in Eagle Lake building houses. So that was his second occupation.
Huh.
And then when the strike, he refused to be scabbed. Let's see, a scab? Is that what they call
Right,
it?
right.
So then when the strike was over, he returned to the railroad in Glidden, which ended up in his death,
Yeah.
which was very...
Well, I've got to tell the favorite story of mine is that he was a switchman in the railroad yard, and he always put his shoes out on the back porch to air after he worked. And we came back from town one day, and the shoes were gone. So he goes in the house and gets his pistol and goes over to the railroad yard. And of course, the hobos at that time, during the Depression, came in from San Antonio and Houston, and when the changes were made on the train, they hoboed around town looking for a meal.